there. That's because the browser is only seeing right what it has in front of it. So if I go ahead, press again in the edit box and press Control F, go ahead and search again for it, I can see it now, right? And actually the browser will be able to see it now and say like, oh yeah, that's there. So it's important to note the difference between the search bar for your browser and the search bar for the actual configuration editor in your system. Let's go ahead and save. Sometimes it will do this, not sure why, that it will have a little, miscommunication with the API. I hit save there and restart the manager and see what will happen. So it will take a little while before it actually manages to restart the manager. So it may take, a couple minutes. And actually we could try and see the logs eventually when they get here. So I can set these to real time and set it to go for the newest ones up on top. And I do believe that eventually, since I have it set on real time, what this is doing is this is constantly reaching out to the API. Of course, if I'm restarting the manager, the API is not available. So we will get that sort of error. And actually, if I try to navigate, it will go through that health check again, and it will fail that health check. But apparently not there. I'm expecting this to fail about now. Actually, I do believe that it restarted quite quickly. So yeah, now we have this. Let's go ahead and do this. So what I wanted to show you was I set up authentication with passwords, but I did not give it a password. So if I search the logs for the word password, it's going to say, hey, yeah, I'm doing authentication. I'm using password, but I'm using a random password. And this random password will be recreated each time the manager is restarted, which may work for some systems, but it is not, something that really scales well if you want to have a predictable password. So in that case, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and do that command again, and I'm going to restart the manager. And I can do so from the command line as well if I want. So I've got systemctl restart manager here. I'm going to switch to another terminal so that it's a little bit easier to read on your side. So H0 will have that info directly here from Linux. And actually, what I also want to show you is that log file that we were seeing before is here, the bar ossec logs.log. And in here, you can see all the activity that's moving along. Now, if I go ahead and search this file now for the word password, we'll see two entries, the one we saw before and the one where it's saying that it's going to be using the password that it found on the default file. So you can see here, this was the first time and this is now. So now it's using that password, which we have populated with the word secret. Okay. And you may find, sometimes you'll get run into this. This, if everything is working as expected, can happen whenever the manager is restarted and the API is not available immediately. You can just hit retry over here and you'll get back to a normal functioning system. So I did do those two things in the different ordering. So I started exploring the web interface before actually logging into and modifying the configurations. But I did want you to show, where things are also on the web interface and how almost everything is available on the web interface. We are trying to make it so that everything that makes sense to be on the web interface is available on the web interface, especially since a lot of our users are using our managed service, right, where they won't have access to the back end. Okay. Okay, perfect. I was just reading a message. Somebody managed to log in? No. Okay, let me know if at any point you need any help, by the way. So finally, you will have the ability here to change things, but also visualize all of the information and, almost all of the visualizations, or probably all of them, will allow you to create filters on what you're seeing. So for example, if I wanted to, instead of seeing the last 24 hours, to focus on this particular peak, I can go ahead and just click and drag onto it, and this gets updated and all the graphs go along with it. So maybe I want to focus on things that are level 12 or above. I can see that here. I can see that all of them, we have 10 events, level 10. And so all of them are authentication failures. We can see later on what that is about. And also note that by default, the Wazuh dashboards application jumps directly into an application within it that's called Wazuh. That might be confusing, a lot of Wazuh in there. This is, as we'll see, that this is because Wazuh dashboards is based on OpenSearch, specifically OpenSearch dashboards. And we'll see how we can also use the different tools provided by OpenSearch to do even more with our information. Finally, I mentioned there is an API that we are using to do, to request the status of our machines, to go ahead and collect these logs, modify the configuration. All of that is done through an API that the manager provides, and you can access that API either through here. We do have a tool here, the API console, that allows you to run things like, hey, give me the information of the manager. Or you can also use any external tool, like an API client like Postman, or even curl, right? You can use curl to get information. And so that's why we provide it here, sort of that you get a first feel on how you do that. It is interesting to note that starting with Wazuh 4.0, the API uses JWT tokens, JWT, for authentication, right? And so what we do is here we created a couple of variables so it's easier to manage, but then we request a token to this particular endpoint so that we can do the rest of the communications. And then we use that token for anything that we want to do. In this case, for example, we're just getting the base information. So I can copy those set of commands. Let's give it a little space here, and then paste them here. And inside of it, once I run this last command, what I will see is the answer from Wazuh saying, this is Wazuh 4.3.5, and this is my information. I can then use that same call to edit it and get more information, like that manager info that we just got on the interface. You can get that here, and we get the exact same reply as we did here on the interface, on the API console. Okay, and later on we'll see how powerful this API can be, in which we can use it to automate certain actions, or to like querying for information, or even register agents and run actions that are not made available from the web interface by default, right? You can even update agents through the API, and that will be in an upcoming exercise. Okay, so any questions? I do also want to mention that during these exercises, we will do several things. Modify the default configuration in a way that is meant to be done for educational purposes, right? For example, setting the log alert level to 1 is not something that would normally be useful in a production environment. And we will do several things like these, right? So it is important to note, and I'll try to mention exactly where each one of these will be, that are only intended for this training and not as a general recommendation. Okay, so let me know if there are any questions. Right on somebody who tells me that all good from their side. And so let's talk a little bit about agent registration. Okay, I mentioned before that all communications between the agent and the manager are encrypted with a unique key, right? But where does that unique key come from? Well, the agents must have this key, and they get it through the registration. Registration is can be done on a manual basis, like using a binary that's called managed agents. However, that is a quite legacy system. It's not normally used and in production. What you do use is the authentication daemon on the Wazuh manager. So this is a service that listens in by default on port 1515, for which we, for example, have just set it to use a password, right? It is unauthenticated by default, but we recommend using at least password protection, so that you can, make sure that you nobody else adds in any agents that are not supposed to be in your environment, and adds noise to the system. We can also use certificate-based registration to verify the identity of both the agents being registered and also the manager. So you can use that sort of verification in both sides. And then each agent, the agents can be registered using different methods. So for example, number one, the default method is agent auto enrollment, right? The agent, you simply install the Wazuh agent, modify the configuration file, and when you start the service, it will ask by itself for a new key when it finds that it doesn't have one. Actually, this auto enrollment also works on down the line. So say, for example, an agent for some reason gets deleted from the manager, or its key is no longer valid for whatever reason, it will automatically request a new key when it finds that. And if it has the password, if it has the authorization to do so, it will receive a new key and restart itself so that it can continue communicating. There is an agent auth tool that can be used on the side of the agent to, from the command line, request a new key. That is a possibility, and that is sort of what indirectly auto enrollment is going to be using. And then also number three, this is actually, it should be the default. I recommend installing agents using deployment variables. The deployment variables will allow you to run all actions in one single go. I mean, it allows you to install the agent, configure it, register it, and set all the, specific groups and settings that you may be interested in. And then you can also, concatenate the command to start the service automatically. That way you can automate the installation of agents, and this can really expand, so that you can monitor thousands of endpoints quite easily. Okay. And then finally, there is the option of using the Wazuh API. The Wazuh API, again, is going to be very powerful. And you can request a key through the API in which you can specifically let it know what are the parameters that the agent's going to have, for example, for ID, for name, for a specific, binding IP so that it cannot connect from anywhere else. You can set all of these settings. You can even set the encryption key through the API if you want it to be predictable. This is somewhat rare, however, it's not completely unheard of. Because, for example, if you have ephemeral instances that get created and deleted automatically, then you want to be able to give them the same ID, even if they were deleted at some point, and you want to re-add the same machine and sort of have continuity over the information of that specific agent. That way you can, even if it's not the same machine because it has been destroyed and then recreated, you can use this so that you can have a historical view of every time that instance has been created. So that's one use case for the Wazuh API. And many can come up, but it is still somewhat rare. The easiest way is to use, deployment variables, which in turn will use auto enrollment to configure the auto enrollment variables. Okay, so this is where we start getting our hands, a little bit more to work. And so we have 3 different exercises, 1C, 1D, and 1E. All of them are to register agents, right? The idea here is to register our Linux agent using auto enrollment. If you log on via SSH into your Linux agent machine, you'll find that you have an agent already installed in there. And so the idea is to modify the configuration and restart the service so that it starts auto enrolling. It is important before you do all 3 of these exercises, and you'll find that in Lab 1C, to create the groups for Linux and for Windows agents, right? Because we will be using those groups later on, and it is important because the enrollment or the registering will fail if you try to add it to a group for that does not yet exist. And also, groups are case sensitive, right? I strongly recommend that you use, Linux all lowercase, and also you use Windows or lowercase for these groups. Okay, so don't try not to add capitalization to that. Then finally, we can use deployment variables, which I strongly recommend using for the Windows agent. So we'll do that. And in the case of the final, the indexer machine, we'll use the agent auth so that you can, get an idea of what, is happening in the background on these other two sets. Okay. So are there any questions so far? Right, and let's go. I still encourage you greatly to ask us many questions. I've seen some through the chat, so that's great. And no, let's go ahead and do 1C, 1E, and 1E. As I mentioned, I will be looking at progress. So right now, 1